Hey everyone, this is Professor Imler, and I just wanted to quickly kind of go through some of the questions that you all had about translating natural English into more formal sentential logic. And so let's take a look. Here are the questions you all had, which kind of look like most of the questions we had, so it's okay. We'll work through them. First thing we want to do is let's start with this first one. So we are dealing with Mr. Ace and Mr. Edge getting murdered. So as we go down to our key, this is going to be the second set of keys right here. And then here's A for Mr. Ace, E for Mr. Edge. And so we know that we're going to be dealing with A and E. Okay, so we know we're going to be dealing with A and E. We have either. So A comes first, so that's A, and then we're going to have E. So it's either one or the other. Now remember that when we go back to the text, either ends up being a disjunction. And so when we say something like either this happens or this other thing happens, well, that's going to be a disjunction. And we write a disjunction, right, with that little V. And so it'll be A, V, E. And that's it. The second one, if Mr. Edge was murdered, then the cook did not do it. So we want to make sure that we remember this not. We have an if and then a then, so that tells us somehow we are going to have that conditional. And let's see what the conditions are. So if Mr. Edge was murdered, now let's take a look at what we're dealing with. Okay, Mr. Edge was murdered, so that is E. We know we're going to be dealing with E somehow. Right, so if Mr. Edge was murdered, then, so now let's put our conditional. The cook did not do it. Now, the cook did it is C, but the cook did not do it, so we need to write not C. And so there you go. That is how this one is done. Now let's move on to the next one. If, we have another if. A then, so we know again we're going to be dealing with a conjunction. So if the murder weapon was a frying pan, let's take a look down here. Murder weapon was a frying pan, that was F. So if F, then, right, so we have an if then, there's this conditional going on. Then the culprit must have been the cook. Another way of saying that is the cook did it. So, if it was a frying pan, then the cook did it. And so we just write C. And so it's if F, then C. Or F, conditional C. All right, now let's look if the murder was not a frying pan. So notice we're going to have some type of negation. And we have a either or statement. So we know we're going to have a disjunction. And then we also have an if and then. So we get to use quite a few things here. We're going to be using conditional, negation, and disjunction. Okay, and then when we look at the murder weapon, frying pan, that is going to be F. Culprit was either the cook or the butler. So this is the butler did it, this is the cook did it. So we are going to be dealing with F, C, and B. So let's start assembling this. So if the murder weapon was not a frying pan, so not a frying pan, that looks like it's going to be F, but we have that little not. So we're going to put the negation. So if the murder weapon was not the frying pan, then what is the case? Well, let's just deal with this separately. So let's just deal with then the culprit was either the cook or the butler. Let's just mess with that first. So with either, as we saw earlier, either, right, is a disjunction. So let's pop back. So it's going to be a or, so we're going to have an or statement. And then who was it? It was either the cook, which is C, or the butler, which is B. Okay, here we have a whole string of things. So we have negation F, conditional C, disjunction B. And so what we want to know is, what's kind of the order of operations? Do we need to do this first, and then we can do the conditional? Or you could imagine it also being written where we do. It's not the case that if F then C or B. We don't want to say that. Rather, notice this if then. So this this part of the conditional stands on its own. And what we need to do is put this in brackets, but brackets are the same thing as parentheses. So we can also write it in this way. And so at the end of the day, what do we have? Negation of F, right? So the murder weapon was not a frying pan. Then, right, so we have our if then. The culprit was either, right, so we have that disjunction, the cook or the butler. And so there you go. This is how that one would be done. Okay, what's next? If those creatures are chimpanzees, so we're going to be dealing with this key here. If those creatures are chimpanzees, and so we know that is C, so we're going to be dealing with C, then they are neither gorillas nor men in suits. Okay, so we have a nice if then. So we know there's going to be a conditional. If C, right, if those creatures are chimpanzees, then what's the case? Then neither gorillas nor men. Now, the gorillas being in suits and the men being in suits, that is, well, that's G and M. So our real question here is, okay, so how do we do neither nor, right? This is a negative way of saying either or. So normally this would be gorillas or men. But it's neither. So we need to negate it. So we'll bundle it together, and then it is neither this nor that. So we write the negation, and then we bundle G or M. All right, so let's do the next one. Since the cook did it, the butler did not. So how do we deal with since? Really, all you really have to know here is that we are making two assertions. The cook did it, and then we are also making the assertion that the butler did not. So we're making two assertions, and we want to combine those using and. Since the cook did it, right, that is C. And now this is how I write the ampersand. The butler did not, and so that's B. So it is both C and B. The cook did it only if the Duchess is lying. Okay, so we have the cook did it. That is C. So we know we're going to have a C. The Duchess is lying. The Duchess is lying. D. Now, how do we combine only if? That's the question. We know we're going to have a C. So let's just write this out. C, we know we're going to have a D. There we go. So the question is, how do we deal with only if? We know we're dealing with an if statement, so we know we're going to have some sort of conditional. But do we put it this way, or do we write D then C? And remember, the only if actually introduces the antecedent, and the antecedent is the first part of the conditional. The consequent is the second part. So it is not this. It is actually if D, then C, because of how only if works. Because only if introduces the consequent. Okay, we're getting towards the end. Those creatures are men in suits. So those creatures are men in suits. We're going to be dealing with M. So then also, or they are not. So we are still dealing with another M. Looks like we have an or, and we have a negation, and we have two instances of M. So we'll put M and M. We have an or they are not men in suits. It's the case that these are either men in suits or they are not men in suits. All right, let's look at the next one. Those creatures are neither gorillas nor chimpanzees. So we know we are going to be dealing with C and G given our key. And so, yeah, G and then C. So how are we going to do this? Remember up here, the way we did neither nor, we did it as a negated disjunction. And so we just put that here, and we'll just follow that same pattern. All right, next, unless those creatures are men in suits. So let's see. We're going to be dealing with M. They are either chimpanzees or they are gorillas. Ooh, we have all of these in play. And so our rule is if the sentence can be paraphrased as unless A, then B, or unless A, B, then it can be symbolized as A or B. And we want to always write it like that in our class. So let's go back here. And so because we have an either, we have an unless. Unless is actually going to be a disjunction. So then we have men. The creatures are men in suits, or they are either, so we need to bundle this together, either chimpanzees or gorillas. Okay, so this is how you would work through these. Take a look. If you see something that you think is amiss, let me know. So again, if this is helpful, fantastic. This is how you should think through these things. If not, please let me know and I will work with you. Anyway, thank you and have a good day. Goodbye.